Okay, well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to talk, Georgia. Very, very kind of you. I never need much of an excuse to come to Chateau. It's my favourite place and has been so for a long while. And I've been really lucky to get to know everyone here much closer over the last couple of years, which has been lovely because they're a great bunch, as you probably all know. I'm a bit of a moaner, so I always start with this to kind of have some sort of optimism at the beginning, just to kind of to make sure that I don't rant too much, and just to say we completely underestimate the potential of what a new landscape could be. And I'm not quite sure, obviously, what all you guys do. I guess obviously you've got either an interest or you're in the profession, but I think landscape architecture and garden design of any sort, or anyone that's dealing with green space, it's a very exciting time because you know, you can design new landscapes to become incredibly good for wildlife and, of course, more importantly, for people. So I think we mustn't underestimate that. You know, I know that in this country we're always tending to hang on to the bits of ancient woodland and the bits of nature reserve, and we look after those very carefully. But I think we've totally underplayed how good a new landscape can be for wildlife, especially, very quickly. So I'm going to sort of talk about the systems that make all these things happen, because, you know, all of us working away individually in our way is good, and we need to keep pushing. But what we need to do to make the real changes, certainly with regards to biodiversity and how we're going to cope with climate change and all the other pressures we're going to have, is to start to look at the policies and the systems and the planning that make all these things happen, and to force change. Sadly, I think really that's the way we've got to go. We've got to force developers to be good, we've got to force highways to be good, and we've got to force farmers to be bloody sight better. So we've got to force it, because none of these people on the whole are going to do that for the love of it. Yeah. So I think that's the thing that's a real important thing to be clear of. And one of the I put the ear protection up because I think that piece of equipment sums up general social housing, public space maintenance, right? So we looked after a housing estate in East London for 18 years. And when we took it over, our contract really didn't allow us to take these things off, right? So what the contract said is you got to cut grass, you got to trim hedges, you got to poison stuff, and that pretty much is the contract. And all those things don't really allow you. Either got them on or you've got a suit on for the herbicide. And if we can get what maintenance contracts and what maintenance people should be doing or be allowed to do is to take those off and talk to the people that are obviously living there and interact with people and change the landscape to suit the people that live there. And you cannot do that if you've got these things on. And the job is just shit if you have them on all the time. It really is. You know, and it kind of takes away the joy of gardening and landscape. And I'm talking about public space maintenance contracts now. I'm not talking about, obviously, beautiful gardens like here and all the other guys. But I mean, the biggest majority of public space is looked after like that. So that's the change we need to make. Now, this is one of my favourite photos. This photo pretty much sums up how our system works with regards to new landscapes and the balance between money to build stuff and money to look after it. Yeah? And again, that's the big elephant in the room always, and has been within design and landscape for many years. So these guys have turned up. Obviously, they've probably planted the tree quite poorly. They probably won't water that, but there's 3 dignitaries there. They're going to get a photo. The funders are going to be happy. Everyone's joyous about it. And then they all go, right? Everyone disappears, and then the £10 an hour guy with a strimmer turns up to look after all these places. And that is the nature of funding. So you can get money to build stuff, like when we was on the housing estate in Hackney, so-called deprived area, no problem getting money to build stuff. We could always get money to build stuff. But if we ever suggested to people that we wanted a percentage, and a generous percentage of that money, to pay a local gardener to look after it with the community after we finished it, no way, nothing. And the day we start shifting the emphasis to constantly wanting to build new things and into paying people to care for a place, I mean, you know, that's what's the joy of this place. The joy is people care about it, and you can see people care about it, can't you? Do you know what I mean? And it's the people on the ground, on their knees, literally, that that make this place so good. And there's none of that in the funding. There's none of that emphasis in the funding. And I think that's a big system change. I don't think design needs to be that good. Like on our estate, I'd say, this is a judgment, but I'd say after being there 18 years, my residents would much rather see more of us out there hand-weeding, chatting, looking after the place, changing it, tweaking it slightly to suit them, than me installing another pergola or another piece of paving. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying we don't do new stuff, obviously we do, but we need to shift the emphasis more onto the people that care for it. And that applies to the wider society as well, I guess. So this is the sort of minor changes we made. So we have a big Turkish and Kurdish community on the estate. They love dolma. They love grapevine leaves. It's like they never left me alone about it. And so all we did was we just started planting grapevines on the railings. So we've got the perfect trellis already in place, because railings are the best thing for a maintenance contractor on housing estates. Railings are a joy because they give you something to grow things up. They give you an edge so that people don't walk straight over your planting. They're just a wonderful piece of infrastructure. And we did that. That was the best thing we ever did. If anything we did, that was the thing that we got most comments, most praise, because people were desperate for fresh, green grapevine leaves. And that tiny change, and the only reason we knew that was happening was because we didn't have area protection on and we talked to the people that lived there. Now that's the minor changes that don't cost hardly anything, that are massive in comparison to spending all the money on some fancy, don't get me wrong, I love new design and I love design in general, but I think especially on social housing, I think we've got to put much more emphasis on people that are caring for things. So that's one thing. And the next thing really that I stumbled into really was thinking about, I think maybe because I'd come up through no training, no horticultural training or any training in anything regards to what I do for a living now, maybe that freed me up to think about other ways of doing things. And if you keep this in mind always, so 20% of all the SSSI sites in the country are on chalk pits, gravel pits. In other words, places we have totally trashed and then left alone. Right? And then within a very short space of time, they are our best wildlife sites. So keep that in your head, because that, we know that, and that's been happening for many, many years, but for some reason, we don't look at those environments and go, oh, they're really good for wildlife. What makes them good for wildlife, and why can't we design that into a new landscape? Why can't we actually design a chalk pit and a gravel pit? Or why can't we, in other words, take the elements from that and put it into a new landscape? Because we know this happens, but we ignore it. It's just a nature reserve and it's really good, but we don't seem to think, why is that? Why is that? And why is it good? And generally, these places are good because there ain't no topsoil and they're very, very all over the place. The topography is complex, the structure is complex. It's the complexity of these places that makes them so good for wildlife. And that's a really good thing to keep in mind when you're designing new landscapes. So this is the Highways Authority. So this is the A13 near me, near Basildon. And they widened the A13 because of all the new container lorries coming out of DP World. And they moved the embankment back and they created this beautiful sandy bank, which is about a mile long. Now, that bank is pretty much, virtually the same as the Thames Terraces. And again, I don't know, down near us, there's the Thames Terraces, which basically are gravel, sandy, drops down towards the river. And they are one of the most important places for invertebrates. They are like gold star places for invertebrates, unbelievably important. And the Highways, less than a couple of miles from those terraces, created this wonderful new Thames Terrace. Then, of course, because they'd done it for the last 100 years or 50 years, they then cover it in at least 200 mil of topsoil. Everything, default, that's what they do. So that completely destroyed that habitat. Now, the council, Thurrock, go on about it on their website, how good the Thames Terraces are, and it's in Thames Terraces are a big thing. We create a mile-long new Thames Terrace, and then we destroy it. And I think again, it's a system thing because you get loads of ecologists in, including my big good friend John, who's just arrived. You get loads of ecologists in, go into these schemes before they're built, don't you, right? So we send loads of ecologists in to find out what stuff we're going to destroy, right? So there's lots of money spent then finding newts, finding slow worms, finding whatever that thing. They're going to all be destroyed anyway. There's a bit of mitigation and compensation work, so John has to move newts, move lizards, move things that are on the legal list, right? And often they're moved to places that aren't going to be anywhere near as good as where they were. So in other words, that whole front-end process is not that successful, is it? It's not all that good. We're going to destroy it anyway. And then when we come to redesign the landscape after we've finished the scheme, where's John and his colleagues? There are hardly any of them, right? So there's hardly any ecologists that go into designing the new embankment. The most important thing, because if that's designed in an interesting way, that can become better than the original embankment was, maybe. Do you know what I mean? So there's that whole front-end money to find out what we're going to smash to pieces, and then there's no money to give to employ ecologists, entomologists, important obviously, and to actually have a creative, interesting landscape that goes back. It's just blanket topsoil, flat. So in other words, it's the same soil, the same angle soil, all raked flat. So there's no complexity to that, is there at all? And what creates biodiversity? It is complex landscape. So there's, you know, the possibilities are huge if we just tweak that. Another, I mean, and obviously, so there's gravel pits, chalk pits, brownfield sites. So this is the place in Canvey-Wick. I don't know if anyone's been to the Canvey-Wick. It's a nature reserve now. So that's been abandoned, I guess, for about 70 years. Do you know about that? Yeah, so an industrial site abandoned for 70 years. In other words, we haven't designed it, we've just smashed it to pieces, walked away from it, left it. Third most important place in the country for invertebrates, right? So that includes all your ancient woodland, all your wonderful old meadows and all those places that we think where all the wildlife is. This is more important. And all we've done is leave it. Now, that's fine, but what we could do, that could have been even better if we'd have designed it. Do you know what I mean? If we used our knowledge and designed that, we could have made that probably even better. And this is where the potential is with landscapes, I think, is to take why that's happening, what's good about that, and build it into a new landscape, especially in public areas. I'm not necessarily suggesting you put up old steel girders in your back garden or these things, but in public landscapes, we should be learning about that because it's the complexity of these places. You know, it's like Dixter, and so Fergus has had his big biodiversity survey done, right? And why is he chock-a-block with biodiversity? Because he has February to December, year-round, full-on flowers, food, pollen, more than any insect could imagine in their whole, and their biggest dreams is Dixter, right? So he's got the food source, but if he just had the food source, the biodiversity would be way, way less. What he's got alongside that is the structure of an old buildings, old barns, dry stone walls, topography, bits of green roof. He's got that wonderful complexity, and he's got disturbance that comes from gardeners. So he's got a disturbance of the general gardening good for invertebrates. So without the structural stuff, the plant stuff is not anywhere near enough. It's just as important to design in structure into landscapes. The structural stuff is so underplayed, and we need to design this stuff into new places. Now, thankfully, the highways people have changed their mind in October, November last year. There's a new policy now written by a guy called Ben Hewlett, who came up and did a workshop with us the other day. Really great guy. He pushed and pushed to get this through, and as he said to me, he put it through, he put it to them, and he couldn't believe they said yes. But anyway, they've said yes. So what this means is now that highways, all new landscapes, all new highway work, doesn't have topsoil put back on it unless there's a good reason to do so. And lots of other things. And Phil Sterling, who's another amazing guy that's interesting, if you want to look up anyone who's doing this sort of stuff, he's working with Ben to reduce the detail of this policy. So that's a game changer for highways. And if highways can do it, there should be the confidence for a lot of other places to do it. So with all that in mind, this is where I live. So, and this is about 1.5 miles from the A13. So after banging on to the people about the A13 and completely failing and them covering in fact, they're still covering the last tiny pieces of sand with topsoil as we speak. Every tiny piece of landscape is covered meticulously with 8 inches of topsoil. I knew the hauliers that were taking away all the sand because they took away thousands of tons to make the road wider. And I bought some back off him. So we bought, I guess we've probably got about 80 tons now of A13 sand in our garden. And that's what you can see here, a lot of that is. And lo and behold, now bearing in mind we're on clay, so we're on heavy clay. So since we introduced essentially piles of sand, for want of a better word, we have now accumulated a good 20 species minimum probably now of solitary bees and wasps, that's at the last count, that would never have been with me obviously if I didn't have a pile of sand in my garden because they only nest in sandy soil. So this is what I was trying to say about the potential and the speed of which if you design a landscape correctly or you design it with a little bit of kind of complexity, stuff arrives. And this is the optimistic bit, I think I'd say about new landscapes. You know, this is really optimistic, but we just need to try and push it through into the mainstream. So here's your ecologist. Love your ecologist. And this is James, our amazing entomologist, who has now become a close friend of ours. And he will spend, I guess, half a day standing in fennel like that. And he's sucking off the insects off the flowers. I mean, the guy's just amazing. So you need people like this because they know what stuff wants. But what they're useless at, and James is definitely useless at this, is building the stuff that they want, right? He couldn't build the habitat. He hasn't got the skills to do it. But a lot of you guys, I'd imagine, and a lot of landscape architects will have the skills. So you need James to tell you what sort of habitat you want and what these invertebrates need, and then you need someone with some flair and some practical knowledge to build that in a way, especially in a way that the public are gonna like. What the public are gonna go, wow, that looks really cool, but it's perfect for these insects. It's got to do both, isn't it? You know, because if you design for the bugs, so forget all the other stuff. Design specifically for bugs and everything else comes for free. So if you think about a landscape for invertebrates, pretty much you're going to get all the other stuff come on the back of that. Another godsend of South Essex is the landfill site. So landfill, you know, I mean, we've put up with obviously everyone's rubbish arriving to us down there, but now all the holes are filling up. Happy days. And now we've got these completely blank, fresh kind of opportunity to create amazing landscapes on top of this stuff. But unfortunately, most of the time it gets capped with clay, dumped with topsoil and left. Right? No imagination, flat. So that's the potential. We've got huge potential on top of landfill sites. We've got no user group, no archaeological problems, nothing to stop us doing whatever we want on top of these. So this is a big opportunity, I'd say. That was a little thing we did on one of the landfill sites just to show the different substrates that you could grow soils in with a little community group. So, structural diversity. So, shopping trolleys in ponds, right? I mean, you know, if you said to people, here's, you know, if you try to get volunteers to pull out shopping trolleys in ponds, you get loads, don't you? People kind of hate it. It combines all the worst things in the human nature, dumping stuff, supermarkets, and making nature look bad. But that shopping trolley in that pond is one of the best habitats in that pond, right? So why do they sink ships for scuba divers to swim around, right? You see sunken ships, there's no fish anywhere else apart from on the ship, right? It's the same thing in the pond. It's this complexity. It traps material, it gives cover, it does all those things. So all we need to do is to take that shopping trolley and say, we'll make that cool. So we will have a stainless steel sculpture, or we'll have a stainless steel piece of art, or we'll have something that the public go, oh yeah, that looks good. There's a survey done by a PhD student who looked at the biodiversity on riverbanks, and she found that there was more biodiversity in the litter than there was in the natural structure on the riverbank. More biodiversity in the litter. Because mostly we've removed the natural structure, haven't we? Like dead trees, we've tidied things up. There's very little natural structure. So our litter is taking the place of that, you know? And I don't know, I've got a picture of it, but John, who comes up to me and we chat about this stuff, his job is to survey sites. And what does he use to survey the sites? What does he put down to find where the slowworms are, the newts are, and the lizards are? A bit of old roofing felt, right? A corrugated piece of roofing felt. You put that down, you leave it a certain amount of time, lift it up, all the wildlife's underneath it, right? Now, why that's a piece of man-made material, and it is the preferred place for wildlife. You know what I mean? So it doesn't have to be a natural thing. In fact, it's probably better than most of the natural things. So what we need to do, again, like the shopping trolley, we need to say, right, that piece of corrugated roofing material, we know that's where they all love to go. How can we make that look really cool and design it into a scheme? It could, I don't know, what could it have? It could be made out of recycled plastic and look really cool. It could be circular, could have a hinge on it so we could constantly just lift it up and put it down without disturbing. I don't know. But you know what I mean? It's these sort of structural things that are so important. Now this is pushing it a bit, I know, being in one of the nicest gardens in the country, but in the right place, this is in my garden obviously, you know, badly pruning trees is the best thing for wildlife. And this is really hard to say, but often dead trees are better than live trees because we've got a lot of live trees and we've got very few dead trees standing. This is what the countryside, this is what we're missing as a habitat, is dead standing trees. Right? And it's one of those counterintuitive things that people go, oh my God. And you can't kill trees very easily. I've been trying to kill trees in my garden a lot, right? And they won't die. Believe me, they won't die. They're really difficult to kill. I'm not trying to kill this one. I'm just trying to make it a bit unhappy. And it's very difficult. And this tree is still growing absolutely 20 feet a year. But it's just to place it in your mind that these things aren't a bad thing. Do you know what I mean? And in the right place, in the right piece of landscape, badly pruning a tree is a good thing for wildlife. And it still looks cool because it grows back and it still looks good. So it's a thought. And dealing with waste, you know, I mean, as gardeners, we all know the nice thing about gardening is snipping stuff off, isn't it? The bad thing about it is dealing with all that stuff after you've cut it off. So try and think about reusing it within the environment that you're doing it. And this is a game changer for me, and certainly on the estate we worked on, is lots of compost bins, but not necessarily, you know, compost bins don't have to be posh things. They can just be a piece of, a circular piece of wire. And there's been research to say that, you know, if you just pile stuff in a pile, it's going to work. You don't have to have fancy things to put it in. So try and use your waste. Dead hedges are really great. So all the brash and the cuttings, just stack it in a pile and make it look a bit curvy. Take a bit of time on it, and then you can leave it on site. And these things are in the Hackney Council have just started to do it a bit. This is the bottom pictures at our place, and Hackney Council have just started to do a similar thing in one of their parks. So, structural stuff, really important. And the structural elements of a landscape need to be thought about at the construction stage. So when you get in a new development, so this is a car park near us that we were asked to get involved in. Obviously way too late and obviously with no budget, as you'd expect. £2 million on the visiting centre, no money for the landscape, obviously. Anyway, so car park. If you start talking about, you need to start talking about the wildlife, the structural elements and the landscape with the construction team, because the construction team on these jobs like this can do a lot of the landscaping for you at that stage. But we obviously kind of just separate the two. So, what should a car park be? Should it be a place to park your car, or should it be the new open mosaic habitat? Right? Because it can be. These are perfect materials for open mosaic habitat. A habitat that's very in short supply and is very important and is recognised for being very important, but is very rarely designed in. So, just to recap on this, and this is a planning thing. So this car park was passed by planning in 2020, 150 car park, no plants, no habitat. Passed. Now, I don't know whether any of you find that, I mean, it blew me away. I couldn't imagine that was happening. Could you imagine that was happening in 2020? Do you think that would be allowed to make a car park that without anything? You wouldn't have thought so, would you? So in other words, policy is still the same. We're not making it much better. That's what we were given. We were given I was given the plans, and all was on it was cars. There's nothing else on it, literally cars, or spaces for cars. So there was a few things we tried to do. Obviously, we didn't have much space because they'd only just pushed all the stuff to the side to make the space for the cars. So we said, we've got enough cars, we should make some of the car park spaces into gardens. That's the first thing we should do. And we didn't obviously ask planning about this, but how the hell, who in planning is going to come down and take a garden out and put a car back in? No way. So we took eight spaces out of that back to gardens. But we wanted to define them to make sure they realised we'd taken them away from the cars, which is what we did. And then we used gabions. And gabions, I don't know, obviously, I'd imagine you guys have used gabions at some stage in your work, but unbelievably useful things, because what they do is they allow you to use rubbishy stuff, but you can put it in a nice, neat box, and then people are, oh yeah, that looks cool, right? But if you piled it in a pile, definitely not. If you put it in a nice cube, happy. And gabions are really good things for wildlife generally, really good things for invertebrates, and spiders especially. But the difference is we filled these gabions with local demolition rubble. So not mined stone that comes from 500 miles away, which is what every gabion pretty much is filled with. This is demolition rubble that we bought from a local recycling place no more than 2 miles away. It's local houses crushed up into certain size pieces. Right? That's quite a nice thought that, you know, most of the edge of the car park is local houses. Because the construction industry has to detail and crush these materials into the perfect sizes, you've got that perfect material for landscaping. They're already doing it for construction, so you can tell them exactly what you want. This is 75 to 150 pieces. You can buy a 50 mil, you can buy 20 mil, you can buy 10 mil. Fines, if you want fines, you can have fines in it. If you don't want fines, you can have no fines in it. You've got all this wonderful construction detail that they've already got that you can use for landscaping. So very low embodied energy, only a short distance from where we're doing, and waste to fill all those gabions. 350 tons of local rubble to fill all the gabions. And we put a few bee posts in, and you can see there's a couple of holes were filled within, I guess, within a few weeks. And then behind the gabions, we use more A13 sand. So we got more sand from the road widening, again, no more than a couple of miles away, straight from the road widening, straight into the back of the gabions. So incredibly low embodied energy. And most importantly, the local sand. So local invertebrates that nest in the sand locally will move into this sand. I can guarantee that, guarantee it. So you've got local rubble, local sand. That was all the landscaping done. So no topsoil, no compost, no nothing. So that was the finished sort of article. And then we sowed the sand. And the wonderful thing about using this, because I'm going to definitely run out of time, by the way. I'm going to have to maybe flip through. But anyway, the wonderful thing about using construction waste or mineral soils like this is they're completely weed-free. Right? Completely weed-free. So you can put these stuff down and you can direct sow straight into them. And you can be guaranteed pretty much of, unless you get unlucky with the weather, but brilliant germination, very little competition from weeds, because there isn't any weeds in here. The only ones you're going to get are the ones that blow in, right? And you can pull them out, because you have plenty of time to pull them out, because they don't grow so quick. So this material allows you to direct sow, and direct sowing as a sustainable way of landscaping is obviously the most sustainable. Now, you know, I'm being careful here, because obviously I'm not in any way suggesting you don't buy pot plants, you definitely should, but you know, you've got one little packet of seed, you do the whole car park. Right? No pots, no plastic, no compost. So I'm not saying that it's the combination, and this project we used a lot of Chateau plants alongside the self-seeding, that combination of those two kind of climate change adapted plants maybe from the Mediterranean or the States alongside the native seed mixes. And I think that's quite an important mix. And then, of course, we sowed into the car park. So this granite type 1, brilliant for growing plants in. So you can sow straight into that as well. And the cars weed for you. So you've only got to deal with that little stretch along the edge. The cars, obviously, just backwards and forwards, they keep the weeds down. So this was within a few months of us actually finishing the project. We put some silver birch in. Again, all these things are growing straight in the granite. And the only thing that we put about 6 inches of, that's crushed ceramics that we grew that in, which is toilets, sinks, all that kind of stuff crushed up. That's a really good thing to grow plants in. And this was some of the other sort of details. So we had to use mined stone near the centre because they were upset that the rubble was getting too close to the centre. So we had to use some there, which really pissed me off slightly. But anyway, that's what we had to do. So we made nearer the centre. As we got nearer the centre, we made it a little bit neater, a little bit more refined. And that's the finished thing. So that's within about 4 months of us finishing. So you've got local sand, local rubble. In effect, you've created a mini strips of open mosaic habitat. And this is in a nature reserve. So this is a wildlife trust reserve. The rest of the reserve is obviously it's heavy clay here. So it's obviously hawthorn scrub, lots of lovely meadows, but lots of different vegetation. Completely different vegetation than what we've created in the car park. Because the car park is sandy, very dry, very stressed. So that's a completely new habitat added to the nature reserve. And I haven't got time to talk about biodiversity net gain, but just quickly, that's one of the things that the big things, that emissions in biodiversity net gain is that it's all about what's there originally. You've got to do a bit more of that, isn't it? So if you've got 50 metres a hedge, you've got to do 55 metres a hedge. It's not about, there's no open mosaic habitat at all. Let's add some of that in, because what that does is that adds biodiversity, whereas if you just add more hedge, you're just adding more biomass, aren't you? Really. It's the same species, just more hedge. So you're not adding more diversity. The only way you add more biodiversity is to add different habitats, isn't it? So the biodiversity net gain doesn't seem to deal with that at all, which feels to me a bit weird. And this is the potential. As soon as you start chucking sand around and it's bare, you get all this action. And this is one of the sand piles. Look how many bees are in that. That's within a couple of years of us putting that there. So that's A13 bees have come from the A13 and gone into my garden. 1.5 miles from there, and I'm on heavy clay. So they would never have come here without that little bit of sand being dumped. So that's immediate effect, immediate extra biodiversity. And it's not to say that brownfield landscapes have to look a mess, because they definitely don't, because you're designing them in from scratch, aren't you? So you're dictating the plants, you're gardening them slightly. So these are all pictures of this is all on these materials, no topsoil, no compost, no organic material in the soil at all. If I whiz through, I'll probably come across them. But just in here, there's waste chalk from Tate and Lyle sugar, brilliant stuff. Bricklaying sand, ballast, crushed glass, which is really good as well, like sharp sand. And then you've got ceramics, which is toilets and sinks crushed up. Crushed concrete, that's the local Thanet sand from the A13, and crushed brick and concrete. But there's many, many more that you can use. So what you can do is, once you start looking at soils, because horticulture has always been about, let's put topsoil down, and then let's plant plants. We put plants in that we want to grow, but the soil wants to be something completely different, doesn't it? So we end up, gardening is just trying to stop the soil doing what it wants to do, isn't it? That's what gardening is, really. So as soon as you start looking at soils, you can say, here's the soil that's going to make these set of plants happy. Because it's stressy, it's crushed concrete. For instance, crushed concrete, wild thyme. I mean, you can't stop wild thyme growing in crushed concrete. It's unbelievable. Nothing else is particularly, or very few things are happy in that apart from wild thyme. So thyme does really well. So you can dictate your plants and your plant mix by the soil. So you're designing from the soil back, rather than saying this is the plants I want, but I'm going to put them all in the same soil. I'm not saying that's entirely what happens, but generally you're left with topsoil. And this is the new, we've just had some waste brick. This is from a brick factory in Manchester. This is all their kind of faulty bricks. It feels to me like they must make a lot of mistakes because there's loads of stuff like that coming out. But I think it's not just the habitat and the potential for plants here, it's also the aesthetic of these materials. They're just wonderful materials. Our man-made waste is just beautiful. But again, we've arranged that in a perfect circle. It's that balance of waste but designed in, so designing waste in. All this is all brownfield materials, including, of course, the gabions. And here's what my mate Johnny brought me. This is the stuff that ecologists put down to survey for, correct me, John, newts, slow worms, voles, mostly reptiles, yeah. But voles and shrews get under there, don't they? So in other words, loads of stuff really likes that, and that's obviously just a man-made material. Oh, here's the chalk. This is what my wife Fiona wasn't quite sure what I'd done one day when she came back. And this is 20 tons of waste chalk from Tate & Lyle Sugar, which smelled pretty rank, I've got to say. And they did assure me that the smell would go off after a certain amount of time, which thankfully it has. But that's waste. They use chalk to filter the sugar cane. This is in the factory in Silvertown, so not far from me. And then once they've used it to filter the sugar cane, it's then waste, and they have to get rid of it every year. 11,000 tons a year. Right? So there's loads of this stuff coming out of industry all the time, loads of these materials, and we ought to start looking at them and making better use of them, because that is going to be great for growing plants in. Great. It's chalk with a little bit of sugar. It's like the perfect thing, isn't it? And this is the chalk arranged in a nice circle, right? So now it looks okay, and now we can put plants in it. And the other thing to look at, the other big, is the multifunctionality of things as well. So any piece of infrastructure you put in, I think, any piece of infrastructure, that includes bollards, bin shelters, bike shelters, whatever you can do, paths, try and think if you can do more than one thing. So we're trialing this. This is hogging, which is the old school path material, clay and ballast mix. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong, you wouldn't want it for a major public highway, but for a community garden or for schemes where the foot use is lower. So what we're trying to do here is to say, this is where we're going to get the bees to nest, in the path, and then we can use the borders to produce the flowers and the food source. And if we can do that, we've dealt with the bee nesting space, and we've got a path. Because bees tend to nest on desire lines anyway. Ground nesting bees like bare soil, so they always nest on the edge of where desire lines are anyway, and that's in effect what we're doing, aren't we, by using the path. Anyway, so that's the path, standing dead, and you don't have to have a tree that's died. You can, if you're doing coppice work or you're doing maintenance work, if you cut a tree down, just take it away, dig another hole somewhere where you want it, and then plant it again. So that's what we do a lot of. Because then you can put them where you want, and you can fiddle around and make them look cool and put them in where you want. So standing dead doesn't have to be where it is, although ideally that's good, but you can move them and replant them. And then this is the same thing. So multifunction, Beth Chatto, they've just bought one of these from us very kindly, and it's out in the car park. Obviously no plants on it yet, but this is outside IKEA. So this is somewhere to park your bikes. A very, very heavy galvanised frame, stainless steel waterproofing, something that's going to last for a good 70, 80 years. Bin shelters, Eurobins, beautiful things, aren't they, Eurobins? But if you can make them look a bit nicer, more bike shelters. These ones we've just delivered to the Science Museum in London, so we're starting to get mainstream people thinking about what they can do when they have to put infrastructure in. These things you have to have, don't you, to make the world function. So we've got to get it to do as many things as we can, haven't we? So we've got spaces for bees, spaces for birds, wall, sand piles on the roof, log piles on the roof. Anything we can squeeze into these places, we've got to do. Because it's one of the few places we've got left to add stuff. This is a bird hide we did for the Wildlife Trust. Now, again, this is another one of those things where bird hides, what do you think about when you think about bird hides? You think about boring wooden building, don't you? With creaky door, so you go in, feel really bad because it's got to be quiet and you've got to creep in. And there's people in there, twitchers all in there looking at you as if you're an idiot, right? and then they burn down a lot, don't they? People set fire to them quite a lot. So we said to the Wildlife Trust, look, we should build a bird hide not for bird watchers, not for twitchers, right? One thing is they're going to come anyway. 2 is they don't spend money in the visitor centre because they bring a flask. And 3, we want to get families and kids, we want to get people who don't normally go in a bird hide to go in a bird hide, don't we? And we want to make it colourful. That was the big thing. So we want to make it a really bright colour, the bird hide, right? And then they said, no, you can't make a bright colour. That would scare the birds, right? Obviously not. You know, if you stand, it's not running around, is it? You know what I mean? It's standing still. And so it makes no difference to the birds what colour it is. None. Because it's stopped still and it's always the same. So, and we managed to convince them, and this has been a total success. So people want to go in here, and it's got interpretation, and if they see a bird out of the hole in the front, great. Do you know what I mean? And the twitchers still can go in here at other times if they don't want to be disturbed. And people walking along the back is not a big deal either. It doesn't really put things, honestly. I think, again, this is one of those things that's gone on for years, and I think is so a system that we need to get rid of. These are just some green roofy things. That's the car park. And that's it. I am over time, and I guess. Yeah. Sorry.